The wind howled across Urith-7's frozen plains, a constant companion to the Terran mining colony that jutted from the ice like a metal spine. Private Thomas Riker pulled his thermal collar tighter as he stared out from Watchtower 6. The perimeter sensors had been glitching all morning, probably just ice buildup, but something about the silent expanse beyond the colony walls made his skin prickle. "You're jumping at shadows again, Riker," he muttered to himself, breath fogging in the sub-zero air. 3 months into his deployment, and Tom still felt like an imposter in his combat armor. Before the Scorn attacks intensified, he'd been an engineer tinkering with terraforming prototypes and dreaming of transforming frozen wastelands into habitable paradises. Now he clutched a pulse rifle instead of calibration tools, and the only thing being transformed was him from creator to destroyer. The comms unit on his wrist chirped. "Watchtower 6 report status." Sergeant Crane's gravelly voice cut through static. "All clear, sir," Tom responded, scanning the horizon. Sensor grid showing minor fluctuations in Quadrant 4, but visuals confirm no movement. "Roger that. Keep your eyes sharp. Command's picking up some unusual orbital activity." Tom frowned. Unusual orbital activity usually meant Scorn scout ships. The insectoid raiders had been pressing deeper into Terran space for months now, hunting for something. Intelligence suggested they were after terraforming technology, the very tech that Urith-7 was pioneering. "Understood, sir. Riker out." He adjusted his scanner's sensitivity and tried to ignore the familiar tightness in his chest. The last firefight had left him with more than physical scars. 3 weeks in medical, replaying the screams of his squad mates as Scorn beam weapons cut through their ranks. Dr. Kepler had cleared him for duty, but the nightmares hadn't stopped. The door to the watchtower hissed open behind him. Chief Technician Mara Solis stepped through carrying a steaming container. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a mug of synthetic coffee. "You've been up here for 12 hours straight." Tom accepted it gratefully. "Thanks. Beats staring at reactor readouts all day, doesn't it?" Mara leaned against the observation panel. With her dark hair pulled back in a regulation knot, and perpetual smudge of grease on her cheek, she looked every bit the veteran colony tech. But Tom remembered her from training back on Earth, the only person who'd bothered to explain the terraforming principles to the new recruits in terms they could understand. "I'd take reactor readouts over this waiting," she said. "At least machines tell you what's wrong when they're about to blow up." Tom smiled despite himself. "And Scorn don't." "Their idea of a warning is usually a plasma bolt between the eyes." She peered out at the icy wasteland. "Command's running everyone ragged. Something's got them spooked." "Sergeant mentioned unusual orbital activity." Mara's expression darkened. "They've been moving the core servers into the deep bunkers all morning. Whatever's coming, they think it's big." A sudden flash lit up the sky above the northern perimeter. For a moment, Tom thought it was just the ice moon catching Urith's dim sun at an odd angle. Then another flash brighter this time, followed by a series of smaller bursts that peppered the colony's outer shield dome. The alarms screamed to life. "Orbital attack!" Tom shouted into his comm unit as he grabbed his rifle. "Multiple impacts on northern shield generator." Mara was already at the tactical console, fingers flying over the controls. "Defense grid is powering up, but they've hit the primary capacitors. We're at 60% capacity at best." The floor beneath them shuddered as another barrage struck closer to the central complex. Through the observation window, Tom could see the blue energy web of the defense shield flickering dangerously. "Watchtower 6 fall back to secondary defense position." Sergeant Crane's voice crackled through the chaos. "All personnel emergency protocol Sierra 9. This is not a drill." Sierra 9. Tom's blood ran cold. That meant imminent breach priority protection of core assets and preparation for possible evacuation. They were about to lose the colony. "We need to move," he said, grabbing Mara's arm. "Secondary position is the maintenance hub near Section C." The tower rocked again, and this time the lights flickered. Outside, the defense shield collapsed with a wave of blue electricity that washed over the perimeter like dying bioluminescence. Through the dissipating energy, Tom saw them. Scorn dropships, sleek and predatory, descending through Ureth 7's thin atmosphere. They breached the orbital defenses, Mara whispered. How is that possible? Tom didn't answer. He was already calculating distances, firepower, survival odds. The training kicked in, the part of him that processed variables and engineering problems under pressure. The maintenance tunnels. If we... Another explosion, this one, close enough to spray the watchtower with ice shards and debris. The viewport cracked, and freezing air began to whistle through the fissure. Move! Tom shouted, pulling Mara toward the exit hatch. They half ran, half stumbled down the narrow stairwell as the structure groaned around them. They emerged onto the ground level just as a section of the outer wall exploded inward. The concussion threw them both to the ground. Tom's ears rang, and his vision swam with dancing black spots. He tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue. When his senses cleared, the first thing he saw was Sergeant Crane charging forward with a squad of Marines, laying down suppressive fire at the breach point. Fall back to the core, Crane shouted over his shoulder. Protect the data servers. That's the only thing that matters now. Through the swirling mist of frozen air pouring through the ruptured wall, Tom caught his first glimpse of the enemy. Scorn warriors swarmed through the gap, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming with integrated tech. They moved with unnervingly fluid grace, insectoid limbs bracing pulse cannons that unleashed arcs of destructive energy. A bolt struck the ground near Tom, and he dragged Mara behind a fallen support beam. Marines were falling all around them, their screams cutting through the cacophony of battle. We need to reach the central complex, he said, checking that his rifle was charged. If they're after the terraforming data, they'll head straight for the core, Mara finished. But we'll never make it across the compound with them pouring in like this. Tom's gaze fell on a maintenance hatch a few meters away. We don't go across, we go under. They made a dash for the hatch, ducking energy bolts. Tom slammed his palm against the access panel, overriding it with his engineering codes, when the automated system failed to respond. The hatch slid open, revealing a dimly lit service tunnel. Inside, quick! They dropped into the tunnel, just as another wave of weapons fire scorched the ground where they'd been standing. Tom sealed the hatch behind them and activated his shoulder lamp. The narrow maintenance passage stretched ahead, pipes and conduits lining the walls like mechanical veins. These tunnels run beneath the entire colony, Tom said, orienting himself. We can use them to reach the core without being seen. Mara nodded, her face pale in the harsh light. If the Scorn get that terraforming data. She didn't need to finish. Earth had spent decades perfecting the technology to transform hostile environments into habitable worlds. In Scorn hands, it could become a weapon of mass destruction, capable of destabilizing atmospheres, triggering tectonic catastrophes, or worse. They moved quickly through the network of tunnels, the sounds of battle muffled, but still audible above them. Occasionally, the whole structure would shudder as some heavy ordnance found its mark somewhere in the colony. Wait, Tom whispered, holding up a hand as they approached a junction. Listen. The distinctive, chittering language of the Scorn echoed from a tunnel to their right. They were already in the maintenance system. Tom motioned for Mara to stay back, while he edged forward, peering around the corner. 3 Scorn warriors were hunched over an access terminal, their segmented fingers interfacing with the colony's systems. They're accessing the schematics, Mara breathed in his ear. They'll find the core within minutes. Tom assessed their options. 3 Scorn, heavily armed between them and the central complex. Fighting them head-on would be suicide. But maybe. His eyes traced the pipes running along the ceiling. Superheated steam for the environmental systems under pressure. One breach would fill the tunnel with scalding vapor. I need your multi-tool, he whispered. Mara handed it over, without question. Tom adjusted the settings, transforming the maintenance device into a cutting tool. With practiced precision, he aimed at a specific junction in the pipes above the Scorn warriors. One quick burst. The pipe exploded with a shriek of escaping steam. The Scorn barely had time to look up before the superheated vapor engulfed them. Their alien screams echoed through the tunnel system as they thrashed blindly, their carapaces blistering and cracking. Now! Tom grabbed Mara's hand, and they sprinted past the disoriented aliens deeper into the tunnel network. Behind them, the steam continued to pour out, creating a barrier that would prevent immediate pursuit. That was, Mara started. Necessary, Tom finished grimly. The engineer in him had just weaponized a life support system. Another line crossed in this war. They pressed on until they reached a vertical access shaft that would take them up into the core facility. Above them, the sounds of combat were more intense. The Scorn were concentrating their assault on the colony's most valuable target. Tom checked his comm unit. I need to report in, find out what's happening up there. He adjusted the frequency. This is Private Riker Watchtower 6, currently in maintenance tunnels beneath Section D, with Chief Technician Solis, requesting status update and orders. The response came through broken and distorted, core under heavy assault, defenses failing, evacuation protocol, save what data you can, fall back to extraction point. Sergeant Crane, do you copy? This time, a different voice responded. Lieutenant Vega from Orbital Command. Crane is down. Colony breached on multiple fronts. We're initiating emergency extraction for all surviving personnel. Get to landing pad 3 within 20 minutes, or you'll be left behind. Tom and Mara exchanged looks. 20 minutes. The landing pad was on the far side of the colony. Sir, what about the core data, if the Scorn get the terraforming specs? Central Command is attempting remote purge, but systems are compromised. Primary objective now is personnel extraction. That's an order, Private. The communication cut out abruptly, leaving them in silence, broken only by the distant rumble of the battle above. We can't make it to the pad in 20 minutes, Mara said. Not with Scorn between us and there. Tom stared at the access ladder, leading up to the core facility. Something hardened inside him, a decision crystallizing in the chaos. If they get that data, they'll weaponize it against a dozen Terran worlds. We can't let that happen. Mara caught his arm. Tom, you heard the orders. Fallback extract. You go. Take the east tunnel. It'll bring you out near the secondary landing facility. They might have shuttles there that haven't been destroyed yet. And you? Tom checked his rifle charge. I'm going to make sure the Scorn don't get what they came for. That's suicide, Tom. The core is probably swarming with them by now. Probably. He managed a tight smile. But I know those systems better than they do. I can rig the terraforming drive to overload. It won't just destroy the data, it'll take out half the colony and anything inside it. Mara's eyes widened. The drive wasn't designed to be a weapon. Neither was I, Tom replied softly. But here we are. For a moment, she said nothing, and Tom could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the same mental process that made her an excellent technician. Finally, she unhooked a portable data unit from her belt. Take this. It can interface with the core directly. If you can download the critical research before destroying it, there's a chance. She didn't finish the thought. They both knew his chances of getting out alive were minimal. I'll need a distraction, Tom said, accepting the device. Something to draw them away from the central hub long enough for me to work. Mara nodded. The secondary reactor in Section F. I can trigger a controlled overload. It won't destroy anything vital, but it'll make enough noise to catch their attention. You'll still have time to reach the extraction point. I'll make time. She hesitated, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. Don't you dare die for nothing, Thomas Riker. Before he could respond, she was moving away down the tunnel, her footsteps fading into the darkness. Tom watched her go, then turned to the ladder. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and began to climb. The access hatch opened into a storage room adjacent to the main core facility. Tom could hear the distinctive sounds of Scorn weapons fire just beyond the door. He crouched, listening intently, trying to gauge numbers and positions from the chaos of noise. His comm unit buzzed softly. In position, Mara's voice came through. Triggering overload in 3, 2, 1. The colony shuddered as a distant explosion rippled through the structure. Alarms that weren't already blaring came to life. Tom heard the chittering commands of Scorn officers, followed by the sound of multiple sets of feet, moving away from the core room. Now or never. He slipped through the door and into a scene of devastation. The core facility, once a pristine hub of terminals and humming processors, was now a battlefield. Bodies of Terran security personnel lay scattered among broken equipment. The central data core itself still stood intact, its cylindrical housing pulsing with blue light. 2 Scorn warriors remained standing guard over the main terminal, where a third, larger, with more elaborate tech integrated into its carapace, worked to breach the system's security. Tom raised his rifle and fired twice in rapid succession. The first bolt caught a guard in the joint between thorax and abdomen, dropping it instantly. The second struck the other guard's weapon, causing it to explode in a shower of sparks that sent the alien reeling back. The leader spun with preternatural speed, its compound eyes fixing on Tom with alien intelligence. It chittered something in its incomprehensible language, and Tom had just enough time to dive behind a console before energy bolts tore through the space where he'd been standing. "So much for the element of surprise," he muttered, checking his rifle's charge. 70%. Not ideal for a prolonged firefight. The remaining guard was moving to flank him. Tom needed to act fast. He spotted an emergency fire suppression unit on the wall nearby. One well-placed shot. The suppression system activated with a roar, flooding the room with chemical foam. The Scorn guard chittered in confusion as its vision was obscured. Tom rolled from cover, fired 3 rapid shots into its midsection, and watched it collapse in a heap of twitching limbs. That left the leader, the one Tom now recognized as a command-cast Scorn from intelligence briefings. These weren't mere raiders. This was a coordinated military operation. The foam was clearing too quickly. Tom caught a glimpse of the commander moving with deadly purpose toward his position, weapon raised. He barely managed to scramble away before energy bolts shredded the console he'd been using as cover. "Human," the Scorn commander spoke in halting, rasping standard. "Surrender the data core access. You cannot prevail." Tom blinked in surprise. He'd never heard of Scorn speaking human languages before. This one must have studied them extensively, another sign that this mission was far from a random raid. "What do you want with our terraforming technology?" Tom called out, buying time, as he edged toward the central terminal. "Your species creates to control. We will take your creation and perfect it." The commander moved with deliberate steps, scanning for Tom's position. "The ability to reshape worlds is too powerful for your kind." "Says the species trying to steal it," Tom muttered. He needed to reach the main core, but the commander stood between him and his target. A plan formed desperate and probably suicidal, but it was all he had. Tom removed a power cell from his rifle, overrode its safety limiters, and set it to overload. The makeshift grenade would explode in 30 seconds. He hurled it across the room, away from the data core. The Scorn commander's attention snapped toward the movement, giving Tom the opening he needed. He sprinted for the central terminal, diving the last few meters as energy bolts sizzled overhead. The power cell detonated with a concussive blast that shook the entire chamber. Equipment shattered, and support beams groaned under the strain. The Scorn commander was thrown against a wall, but recovered with alarming quickness, chitinous limbs finding purchase on the damaged floor. Tom didn't waste the opportunity. He plugged Mara's data device into the core terminal and began the download sequence. His fingers flew across the interface, bypassing security protocols with his engineering override codes. Data transfer initiated. Estimated completion 4 minutes, 27 seconds. Too long. The Scorn commander was already recovering, its compound eyes fixed on Tom with cold, alien hatred. "You cannot stop what is coming, human," it rasped, advancing again. "Your colony falls. Your people flee. The data will be ours." Tom's mind raced. He needed more time for the download, but he also needed to set up the core overload. He couldn't do both while fending off an elite Scorn warrior. His gaze fell on the environmental controls nearby. The core was kept at optimal temperature by a sophisticated cooling system. If he could reroute that system... Energy bolts slammed into the terminal beside him, sending sparks cascading over his armored shoulder. Tom dove from his position as the commander fired again, the bolts tracing his movement with deadly accuracy. He needed a weapon. His rifle lay across the room, its power cell sacrificed for his distraction. Tools, then, and engineer's weapons. Tom grabbed a plasma cutter from a repair station bolted to the wall. Designed for precision work on delicate circuitry, it wasn't meant for combat. But at close range, its focused energy beam could cut through almost anything, including Scorn carapace. The commander fired again, but Tom was already moving, zigzagging between banks of equipment. He triggered the cooling system override from a secondary terminal, causing supercooled gas to flood into the chamber. Temperature plummeted instantly, and frost began forming on every surface. The sudden cold seemed to disorient the Scorn commander. Momentarily, these creatures evolved on a warmer world than humans. Tom used that hesitation, charging forward with the plasma cutter raised. The commander recovered faster than Tom anticipated. A chitinous limb lashed out, catching him across the chest and sending him sprawling. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but pain still lanced through his ribs. Definitely cracked, possibly broken. Tom rolled away from a follow-up strike that would have impaled him, the commander's blade-like appendage, embedding itself in the floor. He slashed with the plasma cutter, connecting with the Scorn's limb junction. The beam seared through alien chitin, and the commander recoiled with a high-pitched shriek that hurt Tom's ears. Data transfer, 42% complete. Still not enough time. Tom scrambled toward the central core, the wounded commander in pursuit. He needed to reach the terraforming drive, controls the heart of the entire operation, housed in a reinforced chamber adjacent to the data core. The commander fired again, and this time a bolt caught Tom in the leg. His armor partially deflected it, but the energy still burned through to the flesh beneath. He stumbled, nearly fell, but kept moving through sheer determination. "Your resistance is futile," the commander hissed, closing the distance. "The technology will serve a higher purpose under our guidance." "It's not meant to be a weapon," Tom gasped, reaching the drive chamber entrance. He slapped his palm against the access panel, leaving a smear of blood as the security system recognized his prints. "All technology becomes a weapon eventually," the Scorn replied, raising its arm to deliver a killing blow. Tom triggered the plasma cutter one last time, driving it up and into the commander's thorax with all his remaining strength. The energy beam penetrated deep, and the alien's compound eyes flared with something Tom might have called surprise on a human face. But the commander wasn't finished. Even as its limbs began to spasm, it brought its weapon to bear. Tom twisted away, but not fast enough. Energy seared across his side, burning through armor and into flesh. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, dropping him to his knees. The Scorn commander collapsed beside him, limbs twitching in death throes. Tom crawled away, leaving a trail of blood on the frost-covered floor as he pulled himself into the drive chamber. The terraforming drive itself was beautiful in its complexity, a fusion of cutting-edge technology designed to heal worlds, not destroy them. Tom had helped design components of this system during his engineering days. He knew its capabilities better than most, including what would happen if its containment field collapsed while the core was active. Data transfer, 78% complete. He worked feverishly, overriding safety protocols and reconfiguring power distribution. His vision blurred occasionally from pain and blood loss, but he forced himself to focus. The colony was lost. The evac ships would be leaving soon. All that mattered now was keeping this technology out of Scorn hands. Through the chamber door, he could hear more Scorn warriors arriving, drawn back from Mara's distraction by the commotion of his battle with their commander. They chittered in their alien language, probably trying to assess the situation before entering. Data transfer complete. Tom removed the data device and tucked it securely into a protected pocket in his armor. Now for the final step. He initiated the drive's activation sequence, while simultaneously disabling the containment protocols. The system flashed urgent warnings across the console, which he systematically overrode. Warning: containment, failure imminent. System will catastrophically destabilize in T-3 minutes. Perfect. The terraforming drive would unleash its energy, not in the controlled manner it was designed for, but in a single, devastating pulse. The resulting seismic shock would collapse the entire facility, destroying any data the Scorn hadn't already stolen. A shadow fell across the doorway. More Scorn warriors, these equipped with energy shields that would make them nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Their compound eyes took in the scene, their dead commander, the human, slumped against the drive controls, the warning messages flashing on every screen. One of them must have understood enough Terran technology to recognize what was happening. It barked orders, and the warriors began retreating. They wouldn't have time to stop the overload now, and they knew it. Tom allowed himself a grim smile. Mission accomplished then. The data was saved. The Scorn would leave with nothing but casualties. He tried to stand, but found his legs wouldn't respond properly. The wound in his side had soaked his uniform with blood, and a creeping coldness that had nothing to do with the environmental system was spreading through his limbs. His comm unit crackled unexpectedly. Tom, do you copy?" Mara's voice tense with worry. "I'm here," he managed. "Data secured. Drive set to overload. You at the extraction point." "Almost. Lieutenant Vega's holding the last shuttle. Where are you?" Tom looked at the timer on the console. 2 minutes until detonation. Even if he could walk, he'd never make it to the landing pad in time. "Still in the core," he said simply. "Drive's going critical in less than 2 minutes." Silence on the channel then. "We can abort the launch. Buy more time." "No," Tom interrupted. "The Scorn are regrouping. If that shuttle doesn't leave now, no one gets out." He coughed, tasting copper. "Besides, I don't think I'd make it anyway." "Tom..." "I've got the data, Mara. Complete download. When you get back to command, tell them. Tell them it works. The drive works. It can rebuild what the Scorn destroy." The timer continued its inexorable countdown. 1 minute, 30 seconds. "There has to be another way," Mara insisted, her voice breaking. Tom's gaze fell on an emergency evac tube near the far wall. Originally designed to jettison critical personnel from the facility in case of catastrophic failure, it led to the surface some distance from the main complex. Probably not far enough to escape the blast entirely, but maybe there is, he said, newfound determination giving him strength. "I'm going to try something. Don't wait for me, but keep an eye on the northern perimeter after you launch." He dragged himself across the floor, leaving a smear of blood on the frosted metal. The pain in his side had faded to a dull throb shock setting in, he knew. Not a good sign, but it made movement possible. The evac tube's control panel responded to his palm print. The hatch hissed open, revealing a narrow chute lined with emergency lighting. 1 minute until detonation. Tom pulled himself into the tube, secured the data device one last time, and hit the emergency launch control. Magnetic accelerators engaged with a high-pitched whine, and then he was shooting upward through the colony's infrastructure G-forces, pressing him painfully against the tube's cushioned lining. He blacked out briefly from the strain on his wounded body. When consciousness returned, the tube had deposited him in a small survival shelter on the surface, nearly a kilometer from the main complex. Through its viewport, he could see the colony in the distance, its once proud structures, now battle-scarred and burning. The timer in his head kept counting, 30 seconds, maybe less. He activated the shelter's emergency beacon, though he held little hope it would matter. Then he slumped against the wall, strength finally deserting him completely. "At least I got to see the sky one last time," he murmured, looking out at Urith 7's strange, beautiful twilight. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything Tom had imagined. Rather than a traditional blast, the terraforming drive released its energy in a visible wave that rippled outward from the colony's center. Ground heaved and buckled, as if the planet itself was convulsing. The shock wave traveled through the ice and rock, creating an expanding circle of destruction. The shelter rocked violently, emergency systems blaring warnings as structural integrity was compromised. Tom braced himself as best he could, clutching the data device to his chest like a talisman. Then, the secondary explosions began: power systems, weapon caches, and other volatile materials detonating in chain reactions. The colony, the pride of Terran engineering on this frontier world, collapsed in on itself in a series of cascading failures. The shelter's viewport cracked, then shattered, exposing Tom to the bitter cold of Urith-7's atmosphere. He felt it distantly, the pain from his wounds overshadowing even the intense cold. His vision began to dim at the edges. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was a Terran shuttle rising from beyond the destruction, climbing rapidly toward the safety of orbit. Mara had made it out. The data would reach Earth. His sacrifice would mean something. Tom closed his eyes. He didn't expect to open them again, which made the sterile white ceiling of a medical bay all the more surprising when his vision finally cleared. The steady beep of monitoring equipment filled his ears, and the distinct antiseptic smell of a military infirmary stung his nostrils. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Private Riker." A voice he didn't recognize. Tom turned his head slowly, painfully, to see a medical officer checking his vitals. "You've been out for nearly 3 days." "How?" His voice was a rasp, his throat parched. "Lieutenant Vega picked up your shelter's beacon after the blast. Sent a recovery drone when it was safe to approach. No one expected to find you alive, but you're apparently too stubborn to die properly." Memory returned in fragments. The core facility, the Scorn commander, the terraforming drive overload, Mara. The data, he managed to ask. "Safe. Chief Technician Solis delivered it to command personally. She's been pestering the medical staff about your condition hourly since you were brought in." Relief washed over Tom. It hadn't been for nothing. "The colony." The medical officer's expression sobered. "Total loss. The drive's detonation created a localized seismic event that collapsed most of the underground facilities. Surface structures were destroyed in the secondary explosions. And the Scorn. Their attack force was decimated. Intelligence reports their fleet has withdrawn from the sector entirely." The officer checked something on Tom's chart. "Whatever you did down there, it's got them scared." Tom closed his eyes again. The colony was gone, years of work research and human ingenuity reduced to rubble. But the technology that made it special, the innovations that could transform worlds, had survived. And the enemy that sought to weaponize it had been driven back. A fair trade, all things considered. The medical bay door slid open and familiar footsteps approached his bed. He didn't need to open his eyes to know who it was. "I told you not to die for nothing," Mara said softly. Tom managed a weak smile. "I think I technically obeyed that order." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his still cold skin. "The terraforming data you saved. Command's already implementing the refinements. They're calling it the Riker Protocol now." He opened his eyes to look at her. "That seems excessive." "Earth is spinning it as a major victory. Lone hero defies evacuation orders, saves critical technology, decimates enemy force." She squeezed his hand. "The recruitment videos practically make themselves." "Just doing my job," Tom murmured, though they both knew it had been anything but routine. Through the infirmary viewport, he could see the stars of unfamiliar space. They were on a military transport, heading back to the central colonies. Away from the frontier, at least for now. "What happens next?" he asked. Mara's expression turned thoughtful. "They'll rebuild the colony eventually. Better defenses, improved infrastructure. The terraforming project is too important to abandon." "And us?" "Well, you're being promoted to specialist for starters. Once you're healed, Command has requested you for the technology implementation team." A small smile tugged at her lips. Apparently, someone who can turn a terraforming drive into a weapon is exactly the kind of creative thinker they need. Tom felt an unexpected weight settle in his chest. He hadn't wanted to be a weapon or create weapons. He'd become an engineer to build, to create, to transform. Yet here he was, being celebrated for destruction. "I was never meant to be a soldier," he said quietly. "No," Mara agreed. "You were meant to survive, to adapt. That's what humans do. We transform ourselves as needed, just like we transform the worlds we inhabit." She looked out at the stars. "The galaxy's a harsh place. Sometimes survival means becoming something you never expected to be." Tom followed her gaze to the distant points of light. Out there, the war continued. The Scorn would regroup, analyze their defeat, adapt their strategies. And humanity would do the same. An endless cycle of creation and destruction with people like him, caught in between engineers turned soldiers, builders turned destroyers. But there was hope in that cycle too. The data he'd saved would help transform frozen worlds into habitable ones. New colonies would rise, new technologies would develop. Life would persist and evolve as it always had. "Rest," Mara told him, releasing his hand. "There'll be time for philosophy when you're healed." As she turned to leave, Tom caught her wrist. "Stay," he said simply. "Just for a while." She settled into the chair beside his bed without further prompting. Outside, the viewport stars streaked by as the ship continued its journey homeward. Tom felt himself drifting back toward sleep, the pain in his body dulled by medication, and the comfort of not being alone. He hadn't been meant to survive that day on Urith 7. That fact would probably haunt him for years to come, the knowledge that he had lived while others had fallen, that he had destroyed a colony to save what it represented. But in that destruction, he had preserved something vital, something that would help humanity continue its march across the stars. Perhaps that was enough. As consciousness began to fade again, Tom's last thought was of the terraforming drive, a machine designed to bring life repurposed as a weapon now returned to its original purpose. Technology, like the people who created it, could transform and be transformed. Destruction and creation were two sides of the same human coin. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, sometimes survival meant embracing both.